Hey guys, my name is Jonathan from Joven Auto Works, and today I'll be showing you how to do a clutch replacement on a 2019 Mazda MX-5 Miata. The procedure should be the same on any Miata 2016 to present, and we'll be doing it on this vehicle. It's my customer's, and he apparently blew the clutch. The vehicle has less than 8,000 miles on it, so it's fairly new, and I guess he was doing donuts, messing with the car a little bit, and all of a sudden the clutch didn't want to engage anymore. Based on what I see from the car, it may even be a blown transmission, hard to tell. I went ahead and took a look inside the dust boot for the clutch slave cylinder and found a lot of clutch friction material. So then again, it might also just be a clutch, but we'll see once we take the transmission out. So without further ado, let's get started. All right guys, so we'll start in the cabin. We'll start by removing the shift knob, and then we're going to remove the panels in the center console so we can take the shifter off. So we'll start with that. This should just clip off like that. Disconnect the connector. Put that aside. All right, next thing we want to do is we want to remove the parking brake boot. We can do that by flipping this up and clipping the two clips, sliding it right off. Then we're going to want to remove the two Phillips head screws on the front. And if they have the cup holders back here, pop them off, set them aside. Now we're going to want to pull up on the panel and clip it. Take it out like so. Now we're going to want to remove this insulation piece. Now we're going to want to remove the 4 10mm nuts that hold down the shifter boot. Now we're going to want to remove the 3 10mm bolts that hold down the shifter to the transmission. It's a little hard to see. They're over there. It should come out like so. And then we're going to remove the rubber boot that covers the transmission. We'll be now removing the 4 12mm bolts that hold down this housing for the shifter. I'll now go ahead and pop the hood and get the car on a lift so we can work at a comfortable position. All right, now we're gonna remove the three 10mm bolts that hold down the exhaust manifold heat shield. Heat shield should come out like so. Now I want to spray WD-40 on the exhaust manifold nuts. These nuts go through a lot of heat cycles. Just make sure that it'll come out without an issue. Because if one of these studs snap or the nut runs out, it's going to cause even bigger issues. And these are 14mm. Any manifold or sealing, anything that basically has a gasket, you want to work from the outside in when loosening. So we'll start by loosening the outside ones. Get an extension. And then for now, I'm going to leave that center nut on so that the exhaust manifold is still connected to the head. That way, it won't move too much when I'm under the car, disconnecting it from the rest of the exhaust. And I also don't believe we need to take the exhaust manifold out completely. As much as possible, if anything, I'll just have it hanging and hung up here so that we don't have to take it out completely. Because if we do, we're gonna have to remove these heater hoses, drain the coolant, and then bleed the coolant after we're all done. And as much as possible, I don't wanna do that. Saves us some time and coolant and variables. So go ahead and proceed to under the car. All right, now moving on to under the car. we'll go ahead and remove the 9 12mm bolts that hold the under engine cover. We'll now go ahead and remove the 2 14mm nuts that connect the exhaust manifold to the exhaust pipe. Once again, spraying WD-40 on the nuts and the threads so it'll come out easy. Now we're going to go ahead and remove the 2 14mm bolts that connect the exhaust manifold to engine bracket. We'll be removing the 2 that connect it to the exhaust manifold only. I'll now remove that last exhaust manifold nut. And we'll go ahead and pull it out. We're actually going to go ahead and leave it here. I'm just going to go ahead and put a zip tie to hold it onto this bracket so it doesn't fall down. We may or may not need to remove this manifold completely as much as possible. I want to keep it in there because if we have to take it out, we're going to have to remove these heater hoses and we're going to have to drain some coolant, add coolant, bleed it afterwards. So as much as possible, we'll try to do without having to remove it completely. We will now drain the transmission fluid by removing this 24mm drain plug. All right, once it's completely drained out, we want to go ahead and temporarily install the drain plug. We'll now be removing the 4 12mm bolts that secure the cross member. We'll now be removing the other 4 12mm bolts that secure the second cross member. We will now go ahead and remove this 12mm bolt that fastens down the clutch slave cylinder hydraulic line. We'll now go ahead and remove the 2 12mm bolts that fasten down the clutch slave cylinder to the transmission. And we'll just put it to the side like this. We'll now disconnect the connector from the secondary oxygen sensor. Comes out like so. Before we can remove the brace that connects the transmission to the rear differential, we're going to have to support the transmission with a stand. Next, we're going to remove the four 21mm nuts that connect the transmission to the transmission and differential brace. We'll now go ahead and remove the four 21mm nuts that hold the brace onto the rear differential. And on this last one right here, I'm just gonna loosen it and leave it like that. We're gonna leave that there to prevent the brace from falling when we pry it out. And then we're gonna remove this last 14mm bolt. While applying pressure, I'm gonna hit the brace with a hammer. We'll be able to remove the brace. We'll now go ahead and remove the nuts and bolts that fasten the drive shaft to the rear differential pinion. Before we do that, we're going to go ahead and make a mark. That way when we assemble it back, it goes back in the same position. We'll go ahead and use a pry bar so we can stop the drive shaft from spinning. We should now be able to remove the drive shaft from the differential and pull it out from the transmission. We will now lower the transmission so we can gain access to the various plugs to disconnect, and so we can undo the wiring harness from the transmission. And after that, we'll go ahead and remove the bell housing bolts up top. So we'll start with a downstream oxygen sensor connector. Go ahead and undo the clip and release it. There's another one up top. Go ahead and get a needle nose. A sensor and a connector up here. All right, now we're going to remove all the bell housing bolts up top, specifically those 3 up there. And there's going to be a 10mm holding the wiring harness, or the bracket to the wiring harness. So we're going to remove those 3. We're going to have a bolt right there for the starter, and another bolt coming from the engine side, and right there another bolt right there for the engine. And there's going to be 2, it's very hard to see, but there are going to be 2 bolts right there. So I'm going to go ahead and take those out now. All right, so now I'm going to start by removing that 10mm bolt that is connected to the wiring harness bracket. One of those holding sockets with a swivel works perfect for this because you don't want to drop that bolt and lose it. I'm now going to start breaking loose and removing the 14mm bell housing bolts. We're using a magnet to retrieve the bolts. Well, now I need to remove the upper starter bolt from the engine side. This bolt has got to be the hardest bolt to get to in this entire job. Mostly because you can't see it. But I found that if you put it in one side and try to feel where the bolt is with your other hand on the other side, you can get it to line up. And then you would use a ratchet to loosen it up. Like what I said, this one's very, very tough one to do. Can't even see it. That's loose. Hopefully I can spin it by hand. Finally got that bolt out. We'll now go ahead and remove the starter bolt on the transmission side. I can let that starter just hang right there. I'll now go ahead and remove 14mm bell housing bolt on the engine side. I'm going to leave this one here to keep the transmission connected to the engine until I'm ready to put on the lift and pull it out. But I'm also going to remove these two 14mm bolts that connect it to the little shield in between the transmission and not shield, the plate between the transmission and the engine. I'm just going to go ahead and break this one loose, but I'm not going to remove it yet. And I'm going to break this one, bell housing bolt loose on the other side. I'm not going to remove it yet either. These two on the sides will be the last bell housing bolts that I remove once it's on the lift and I want to pull the transmission out. So go ahead and get the lift, and I'm going to go ahead and put the transmission on the lift. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and exchange this stand out for a lift. Got my lift over here. All right, now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna move this stand to the rear of the transmission. I'm just gonna go ahead and support it by hand. I'm just gonna put it right there. All right. Now I can finally put transmission jack right here. With the transmission jack supporting it, I can remove the engine stand or the stand. And chain it up. All right, now I can remove the final two 14mm bell housing bolts. Then we can take the transmission out. Go ahead and get a pry bar to get it started. Oh, forgot one. All right, now it should come out. Okay. God damn. All right. So I'm maneuvering the transmission a whole lot, and there is absolutely no space for this transmission to move. Looks like I'm gonna have to force it out. Basically, the bell housing makes contact with the body, and I've just about done everything you could possibly think of to take it out. So, looks like we're gonna have to go with pure brute force. So, let's go ahead and try to tilt it down. Least. Alright, let me level it out. This doesn't tip over. So apparently you're supposed to tilt the transmission literally almost 45 degrees. So that this piece right here, where the starter would hit, would clear the body. That's why I have the transmission jack tilted so much. But let me just straighten it so it doesn't fall down. All right, now that's level and safe, I'm gonna go ahead and lower it down. All right, we can now remove the 6 10mm bolts that hold down the clutch pressure plate. Looks like it's seized up. Get all that clutch friction material. All the friction material gone. It's all stuck and jammed up on the pressure plate. All right, now we can remove the 6 12mm bolts that hold down the flywheel. All right, guys, so it's 10 days later. Finally got all the parts in. I was mainly just waiting for the parts. That clutch cover and the clutch disc took a while to come in. They were coming from Georgia and I think another state for the other piece, but looks like it's just not very common to replace these clutches right now. And that's why they were nowhere in my nearest or closest city or dealership in this city or state. But anyways, we got everything we need now. Start by showing the actual clutch disc. All genuine Mazda parts. Here's the clutch disc. The OE manufacturer is Luck, L-U-K. They make clutches for various other kinds of vehicles. It's a good brand. It just sucks that they don't offer these in aftermarket just yet. Here's the pressure plate. All right, what else we got? Clutch throwout bearing. And then we have input shaft bearing or pilot bearing. Ford packaging, but as you know, Ford and Mazda, they are basically the same thing. In some cases. Some other cases no, but they share a lot of the same engine parts and whatnot. But let me go open this up. Yes, needle bearing inside. Oh yeah, we are not going to replace the flywheel. We ended up finding out that a new flywheel was over $1,000. So we decided that to keep it because it did pass my inspection. Since it's such low mileage, there's no burn marks or any deep scratches or grooves on it. And the dual mass part of it, it didn't have much play and it actually felt like it was still pretty new. So we decided not to replace the flywheel. What else we got? We have the exhaust manifold gasket. Exhaust manifold, the exhaust pipe gasket, 2 washers for the fill plug and drain plug, and 3 quarts of manual transmission fluid. This is the gear oil IS long life. So yeah, go ahead and get this transmission back in the transmission jack. I had to use it earlier. Earlier this week, I did a clutch job on a FRS. So I need to get that back on the lift. And then I need to go back into the car, clean as much as I can around this area, replace that needle bearing, install the new flywheel, or not, reinstall the flywheel, and clutch assembly. Oh, and another thing, I didn't have, usually when you buy a clutch kit from the aftermarket, it includes the tool, the alignment tool. I don't have the alignment tool, and when you buy genuine parts, they don't include alignment tool. Luckily, I had a clutch alignment tool off of another Ford that matched the inner diameter of the pilot bearing. So as you can see, it fits in there. But the splines did not match. So usually when that happens, I go ahead and put some electrical tape and I actually get it to work. So as you can see, it's a nice tight fit, centered, and that's all we need to get it aligned. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started on it. All right, we'll now go ahead and start prepping the transmission. We're gonna go ahead and replace this throwout bearing, clean the splines, also clean the bell housing. So let's go ahead and remove this bearing and fork. Fork comes out like that. Go ahead and remove this piece right here so we can clean the fork thoroughly. And this is the old throwout bearing, which literally just fell apart. Huh. There's the trash. All right. Now I like to go and wipe down all the grease out from where that clutch throwout bearing slides on. Also wipe down all the grease from the clutch fork pivot ball. Now let's go ahead and use a wire brush on the spline. Make sure it's nice and clean. That'll allow the clutch to slide on it. So when it's engaging and disengaging, it can slide around and free itself. And we'll go ahead and spray down the entire belt housing. The next piece we want to clean is the fork. Just get a wire brush. And lastly, the retainer. All right. So we want to apply grease right here where the throwout bearing slides on. It's a tad bit of grease on this shaft. Not too much. And then we want to put grease on the actual throwout bearing right here. We also want to put a lot of grease right here on this ball. Failure to put grease here, or a good grease, basically years down the road, you're going to have a squeak. It's going to sound like every time you press the clutch. Make sure you put a lot of grease there, and a good quality grease. So we're also going to put grease. This is where the clutch slave cylinder is going to pivot on, right here. I also want to put grease where this fork touches the clutch throwout bearing. Let's put the boot in. Go ahead and put this here for now. Make sure it goes slides in and out. And we'll go ahead and put this retainer, which goes like this. Then we'll slide the clutch fork in through the boot. Go ahead and get the throttle bearing, gauge it on, and then on this part we want to press down until it locks onto the ball. So you'll hear it click like that. Now we'll go ahead and test the operation. And it's working perfect. This transmission is now ready to go in the car. All right, guys. So we're gonna start with taking out the old pilot bearing. Before we take it out, we want to take note of how deep it is in there. And from the looks of it, there's a chamfer on it, on this, on the crank, and it sits right below the chamfer. So I'm just gonna go ahead and take a mental note. Actually, matter of fact, take a picture of it. That way, if you don't get it wrong, you install it. So let me wipe down the grease so I have a better shot. Perfect. Now we can go ahead and move on, taking it out. So now my pulling tool hooks up to a slide hammer, and the thing is, the jaws or the teeth on my pulling tool, both of them don't fit inside. So my technique on this, if your pulling tool is too big, is you just use one tooth, and I get one of these alignment pins and I jam it. Basically, we're just jamming it so that the tooth, or the tooth of it will stay on it. So while I'm doing that, hook up the slide hammer. All right. And then it's a little tough with 2 hands. It'd be a lot easier if you had a helper, but unfortunately I don't. Go ahead and pull it out. We got it out. So basically what we did there, let me take it off the puller tool so I can show you what we did. So this is the bearing, I don't know if you can see that. And our pulling tool can't fit inside. So what I did was made it so that one tooth contacted, and then stuck this in there. I'm about to drop it. Stuck this pin in there and jammed it so that tooth. Because if I don't have that pin, it's just gonna want to slip out like that. So, all right. Now that that's out, go ahead and clean it. I'm gonna go spray down this whole area with brake cleaner and compressed air. And you especially want to make sure this area where the flywheel sits on the crankshaft is nice and clean. That way the flywheel can sit flat. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and apply some grease to the inside of that area. Where that pilot bearing is supposed to sit. That way the pilot bearing will have an easier time going in. And I also want to grease the inside of this pilot bearing too. And a bit of the outside so it can go in easy. And I'll have it sit right there. Kind of just hold it in. All right, so now in my case, a socket that's similar to the size, maybe slightly smaller, is a 15 millimeter. It may be different depending on what brand sockets you use. But just use a socket and a hammer, and then evenly install it. Make sure you don't install it too deep because you definitely don't want to use the puller tool to pull it back out because you can damage it using a pulling tool. Okay. That's right about where it was. Clean the excess grease. You don't want that to get on the flywheel. You just want the grease on the inside of that bearing where the needle spin. All right, now we'll be ready to install the flywheel. We're gonna put the flywheel exactly same position that it came out. And how I know that is I'm gonna pay attention to these little blemishes right here and right here. And these blemishes will tell us exactly where it was positioned before. So I see this blemish was closest to that hole. To the center. Perfect. So it was like this. And this one right there. All right. Putting it on. Going in a crisscross pattern. I'm gonna up the speed on the impact. Okay. Now we need to figure out a way to lock the flywheel from spinning when we go ahead and torque these bolts down. So let me go ahead and try to figure that out right now. All right guys, so I think I figured out a tool. This piece is off of my 2-jaw puller. It's a Craftsman, and it just took one of the bell housing bolts. And I'll just be putting it right over here to jam it on the flywheel teeth while I try to torque it. Let's see if it works. And these flywheel bolts get torqued down to 85 foot-pounds. All right. That worked out perfect. All right. Now we're gonna go ahead and clean the flywheel one last time. Make sure there's no oil or grease. That way the new clutch disc have a nice clean surface and won't slip. All right, that looks good. I'm gonna go ahead and put some grease inside this blind, not a lot, just a little bit. You don't want too much because it'll get everywhere and it'll slip and slide on the friction disc. Then take note of the orientation. As you can see, it says transmission side, so it's pointing out. Make sure it's on that way. Go ahead and put our clutch alignment tool. And then, perfect. Now we want to prep the pressure plate. Have some brake cleaner on the rag. Clean the surface where it meets the friction disc and on the outer edges where it sits on the flywheel. Just want to make sure it sits flat. All right. So we line up the pressure plate with the dowels like so. And put the 6 10mm bolts in. All right, so this part I don't like to use any power tools. Right now there's a big gap because of the spring. Basically you just want to go little by little until it bottoms out. So and while I do that, I also like to move this around, try to center it as perfect as possible. Basically, if this is not centered, you're gonna have a hard time putting that transmission in. Even if you have the alignment tool, the correct one, it'll sag due to gravity. So we just want to make sure it's perfect center. And once that's perfect center, go ahead and tighten everything little by little. All right, now these clutch pressure plate bolts get torqued down to 24 foot-pounds. Perfect. Now we can take out the clutch alignment tool. This is a good way to test if it's aligned. This basically imitates the input shaft of the transmission. Just put it in. If it lines up without an issue, then you're good. If it does line up, you're definitely gonna have issues lining up entire transmission. If you can't line this up, you're definitely not gonna line up the transmission. I'll tell you that, based on experience. So, now that we're all done down here, I'm gonna go ahead and go up top. We're gonna put an engine support. We're gonna go ahead and tilt the engine back like this, so we have more room for the transmission bell housing when we install. So we'll go ahead and do that now. All right, now that we're up top, we're gonna need to put an engine support on top, and we're gonna have to link up to here. We're gonna raise the front in order to tilt the engine back so that we'll have an easier time putting the transmission in. So we'll go ahead and put our engine support. Make sure it's in there real good. The hook. Go ahead and start tilting the engine back. Being careful not to let this plastic, I believe it's a vacuum pump, maybe wrong. Just be careful that doesn't touch the firewall. Should be. This fucking transmission is a bitch to do. Holy shit. Shit got me worked up. All right, now I'm gonna go ahead and trade this lift or this transmission jack for this stand. And then I'm gonna go up top, and then I'm gonna actually remove the engine support up top. So. All right, now I'm gonna go ahead and put the bell housing bolts up top. There's gonna be 3 right there. I don't know if you guys can see that. And 2 over there. Using a long extension and a universal. I'm gonna put these 14mm bell housing bolts in. I like to put WD-40 on the threads. It just makes the bolts go a lot easier. All right. Now these bell housing bolts get torqued down to 38 foot-pounds. There's another bell housing bolt back here. And then you guys can't see it, but there's two bell housing bolts. They don't necessarily connect to the engine. All they do is bolt it up to the plate. I could sandwich in between the engine and transmission. These two get torqued down 38 foot-pounds. All right. Now we'll go ahead and bring that wiring harness up and through. Remember, there was a bracket. We need to make sure we get that bolt in. A harness bracket. I don't know if you guys can see that, but let me lower the transmission more so I can get more access. Let me go to grab my special 10mm holding socket. All right, using a 10mm holding socket, try to get this harness bracket bolt lined up. This gets torqued down to 106 inch-pounds. Now I'm gonna use a mirror, make sure I got that harness clipped in all the places it should be. All right, looking good. I'll now get the starter positioned. Remember, we never took it out, never disconnected it. So we just literally took the bolts off and put it to the side. So we're gonna go ahead now and actually mount it up. One of the bolts is easy to access. It's gonna be the one on the transmission side, the one I'm putting on right now. And the other one's gonna be a little tough. I like to put the one that's easiest first, that way it's positioned. And usually the one that's hard to get to will be pretty simple to thread on once it's in position from the other bolt. So let's go ahead and get that set. Cool. I'm not going to tighten it just yet. Alright. Now for the other bolt. And now we're going to go ahead and install the slave cylinder. I want to put grease on the slave cylinder where it touches the fork. And then we're going to go ahead . The two 12mm bolts. These clutch slave cylinder bolts get torqued down to 18 foot-pounds. Now we're going to put a 12mm bolt for the clutch slave cylinder line, which is right here. I don't know if you guys can see that. And this one gets torqued down to 18 foot-pounds as well. Alright, now we're going to install the propeller shaft. I like to put lube on the shaft. That way when we insert it in the transmission, we don't tear up the seal. And carefully install it. All right, now we're gonna go ahead and line up the marks we made. Okay. All right, these drive shaft or propeller shaft bolts get torqued down to 43 foot-pounds. All right, now we'll be putting the engine and transmission brace. put some lube on this stud right here, because this one is basically not necessarily a press fit, but it has a tight tolerance. With the brace, I'm gonna go ahead and move this stand forward a little bit. Okay. Now we're gonna go ahead and lift it and link it to the transmission. This 14mm bolt is torqued down to 79 inch-pounds. Now we can remove the stand. 21 millimeter nuts in the rear that connect to the differential. Get torqued down to 147 foot-pounds. And then the 21 millimeter nuts on the transmission side get torqued down to 120 foot-pounds. All right. Now go ahead and install the tunnel brace. It's going to be 4 bolts, 12 millimeter. And they get torqued down to 19 foot-pounds. We'll now go ahead and put the oxygen sensor harness bracket. This uses one 10 millimeter bolt. And this gets torqued down to 106 inch-pounds. We'll now go ahead and install the oxygen sensor. This gets torqued down to 39 foot-pounds. And there's a bracket, fastens it to the secondary cap. And that one gets torqued down to 88 inch-pounds. All right, so we have a new gasket for the exhaust manifold. We'll go ahead and pull out the old gasket. Now I'm gonna go ahead and apply anti-seize to all the nuts. Then I'm gonna go ahead and tighten all 5 of these 14mm nuts, working from the center out. We'll now go ahead and torque these 14mm nuts down to 47 foot-pounds. Once again, working our way from inside out. Alright, we'll now be installing the exhaust manifold heat shield. We'll be using 3 10mm bolts, and we're going to go ahead and put anti-seize on them. That way they'll come off easy if we ever need to take them out again in the future. These get torqued down to 88 inch-pounds. We'll now be installing the exhaust manifold bracket. It's held on by four 14mm bolts. And it goes like this. These get torqued down to 37 foot-pounds. Okay. We'll be now installing the exhaust manifold to exhaust pipe. I'm going to put a new gasket. It fits on like so. And we're going to go ahead and put some anti-seize on the threads of the studs. All right. We'll be installing the two 14mm nuts. These get torqued down to 37 foot-pounds. All right, we'll now be taking the drain plug out, so we're going to replace the washer. All right, and this drain plug, it's torqued 43 foot-pounds. Now we're going to go ahead and take the fill plug out. All right, I got my fluid pump loaded up. Go ahead and start pumping fluid inside. All right, so it took about 2.5 quarts. Went ahead and put a new crush washer. Torque spec on this 24 millimeter drain or fill plug is supposed to be 43 foot-pounds, but I can't fit a torque wrench or a socket wrench in there, so I'll just have to do it by hand with a combination wrench. All right. Transmission fluid is in. Now we'll be installing the cross brace that goes under the transmission. Uses 4 12 millimeter bolts. These bolts get torqued down to 19 foot-pounds. Now we'll be installing the cover that goes under the engine. It's going to be 9 12 millimeter bolts. These get torqued down to 28 foot-pounds. All right, now before we install the shifter housing, we're gonna have to put about 3 milliliters of transmission fluid. Let's go and do that right now. All right. Now we're going to clean the mating surface with some brake cleaner. That will have a good seal. We'll now apply a bead of sealant. It's now ready to install. And these 12mm bolts get torqued down to 16 foot-pounds. All right, now we can go ahead and put this rubber insulator. All right, we'll now go ahead and install the shifter. These get torqued down to 97 inch-pounds. All right. We'll now install the 4 nuts, the 10mm nuts, fasten down this insulator. These get torqued down to 106 inch-pounds. Next, we're going to install this little foam. Now the center console. Find the 2 Phillips head screws. Connector. Oh, put this boot on first. Right here. Let's put that shift knob. Last but not least, the cup holders. All right, guys, it's about 12:30 a.m. Finally got the car done. I'm about to go start it up for the first time. Looks like it's fixed. Before, no matter what gear you're in, the car wouldn't move even with the clutch pedal disengaged or engaged, I mean. And you could actually shift it even though you weren't pressing the clutch with the engine on. So the car actually moves now, and yeah, cool. Looks like it's a success. Now it's time for me to go home because I have work tomorrow at 8 a.m. Gotta open up again. So there you have it, guys. Clutch replacement on a 2016 and up Mazda Miata MX-5. I gotta say, it was pretty tough. There's just absolutely no space inside that tunnel. Is this a job that you can do at home without a lift under the car? Definitely not. I know I've been able to do the trucks before, 240SXs. Those are definitely possible on the ground, but this one, I had a lift, I had a transmission jack, I had all the adjustments I could need, and it still took me long to put it in. Not to mention removing it took a long ass time too. And can you imagine if it was so hard to remove it, what more putting it on, trying to line up the shaft, the input shaft with the clutch disc. So hope you guys enjoyed the video, and stay tuned for more. Thanks, guys.